The Weight of Silence. Book 1, Song 2, The Weight of Small Things. A letter can change the shape of a day. Chapter 4, A Message Carried. Dawn spring light warmed the square. Stalls opened their shutters. Carts bumped into place and went quiet. A thin, wet strip clung to the inside edge of the square's curve, a darker, crescent-shaped patch left from last night's moisture. Gage set his boots on the dry line as naturally as breath. Drills had ended early. He walked the long way around the fountain to settle his thoughts. He told himself he would go straight home, hand on the latch before the sun left the eastern roofs. Northwind's lead. Simple. Do the thing in front of you. Northwind. The voice came from a cloak the color of road dust. A courier stood by the courier stone, the waist-high marker where messengers wait. His boots were travel-dusted, and a wrap bound one knee. He lifted a sealed letter between two fingers. The red wax held a stamp Gage knew without studying it. Troop marked, Alarek's company sign within the larger crest. A seal like that shows at once if a letter has been opened. Straight home, Northwind, the courier said. Not unkind, not soft, just factual. From your brother. Gage took it with both hands and felt the firm paper through the seal. The envelope was firm, but not thick. The weight told him it was words and only words. He did not need to read the wax seal twice. He did not need to ask a question. He already knew the answer to. Thank you, he said. The words came out too evenly. He didn't correct them. The courier's eyes looked tired in a way that comes from delivering hard news. Straight home, he said again, making the point clear. Gage nodded. Yes. He slid the letter into the inside vest pocket, under the leather, so a gust could not lift it by accident. He set his palm flat over it for a count of 3. 1 for taking, 1 for keeping, 1 for delivering. Alarek's bead tugged a lock forward and rested against his cheek, familiar and cool. The little compass within the circle caught the light and steadied his breath. In his pocket, the unworn gold bead lay along the seam. It was meant for a leadership vow he hadn't accepted. He let both weights sit and tried not to confuse them. He stepped away from the stone and angled toward home. The lane out of the square tipped downward and then leveled, a little slope that made feet lazy if you let it. He passed the bakery door, breathed in singed sugar and new bread, and kept his palm on his vest. Straight home. Gage Northwind. 3 boys and a girl had chalked a circle on the far side of the square and were throwing a leather ball the size of a small melon. The circle had a nick out of one side where the chalk had given up on rounding the cobbles. It made their game harder and therefore better. One of them, Stella, who always threw long and laughed when she missed, waved both arms. We need an honest arm, 1 round. Gage lifted his free hand to gesture no. He meant it. He'd already started to shake his head. He had the feel of his home's front door latch under his palm, in his head already. He had a letter under his other hand. Come on, Stella called, reading his body from across the square. You'll make it fair. We're short and Fisk cheats and pretends it's strategy. Fisk, unoffended, grinned and spun the ball on one finger. Strategy, he agreed. Also speed. The leather made a faint, dry sound as it turned. Gage's palm sat flat over the letter and stayed there. 1 round would not be a betrayal of good sense. 1 round would keep his feet on the dry line instead of stepping into the darker crescent and slipping on his own thoughts. He could play with 1 hand if he had to. He could stand as a target and let them throw at him and still not let go. Northwind's lead, he said out loud, to hear the weight of it, and then he turned toward them anyway. He could make room for 1 round. Then done. Then home. Hand on the latch before the sun left the eastern roofs. But with a laugh in his chest instead of a knot. He kept his palm on his vest until he reached the chalk circle. 1 round, he said. Then I go. Fair, Stella said. First to 3 touches. She pushed hair back from her face with the heel of her hand and pointed with her chin. Your middle. We rotate around you. Gage set his feet as if at the archery line, balanced and ready. He slid his palm from the flat of the letter to the edge of the pocket so he could move without overthinking every step. The unworn bead pressed the other side of the seam, A second reminder. Carry, don't drop. Carry, don't brag. Stella faked left and snapped the ball right. Gage twitched toward the fake and then didn't, hands quiet. The ball hit his shoulder with a muted thump and caromed off toward Fisk, who tried to make a clever catch and succeeded mainly in showing off. The circle adjusted at once. Gage kept his body between the pocket and the world. He took small steps, the kind that waste nothing. He let the ball glance off him and then sent it back with the heel of his hand. 1, 2. The score climbed and didn't matter. The point was the clean exchange and the way the circle learned his timing and used it. Wind came from the east and then swirled for a breath. The smell of bread gave way to the smell of iron, someone scraping a wheel rim against a stone. Gage noticed and moved on. He did not take his palm off the vest. He did not. Dip's voice from somewhere behind him. "And here I thought you were immune to joy." "I'm rationing," Gage said without turning his head. "Tragic," Dip murmured, which seemed to be his answer to any plan that involved restraint. He still had morning chalk on his fingers from signing in at the range. Stella sent the ball skidding low, and Gage had to choose between stepping into the dark crescent and letting it pass. He planted on the dry line and let it go. 2-2, Fisk called, delighted, because he thought he had nearly tricked Gage. Gage did not explain that he had not been tricked. He explained nothing and guarded the pocket. One more point, one more good breath to carry into the lane. He shifted his stance a hair to square better to Stella's arm, and the world made a small adjustment of its own. A cart rattled over the far edge of the square. The driver shouted apology or complaint. Metal hit stone with a quick chatter. A child ran through the chalk line and out again without seeing it. The circle opened for the child and closed again. "Ready?" Stella asked, eyes bright from the run, not the score. "Ready," Gage said, and felt the letter under his palm answer with the plain pressure of paper. He meant to stop after this throw, to step out of the circle and back into the lane with the clean feeling you get when you finish a thing exactly when you said you would. Stella sent the ball high on purpose, a test of reach, not speed. Gage took 2 small steps back and lifted a hand to tap it away. Nothing aggressive, just the minimum required. For that brief stretch, his palm left his vest. His hand made the arc it had practiced 1,000 times at the archery line, open and efficient, and he felt the catch of leather against skin and then the easy give of sending it on. He returned his palm to his vest without looking. He knew the weight by feel. 3, Fisk shouted triumphant, and made a bow that was only half a joke. Stella clapped Gage's shoulder, quick and grateful. "Fair's fair, go home," she said, already reaching for chalk to fix the place where the circle had frayed. Gage nodded. Home. He liked the shape of the word. He took a breath that reached his feet. He set his palm flat to his vest one last time to feel the press of paper through leather, then turned toward the lane. Alaric's bead touched his cheek, a small cold where the metal remembered the shade. In his pocket, the unworn bead settled into the seam again, as if it had been made to live there. Both were good weights, he told himself. The letter had his handprint on it, and wouldn't forget the way home. He walked. The square went back to its own errands. The ball thumped and hushed and thumped again behind him. A gull landed on the fountain's lip and lifted off again. The air smelled like bread again. He did not look down at his vest because he did not need to. He kept his eyes on the line of bright stone along the lane where the sun had dried it and followed the dry line with his boots. He counted 3 breaths for the corners between the square and home and promised himself he would not stop for anything between them. At the bend, he let himself glance back once, not to the circle, not to the courier stone, just to the square as a whole. The way you look at a field you've crossed to make sure it stays a field when you leave it. Nothing seemed out of place. He turned his head forward again and kept walking, straight home. The words did not need to be said for the world to hear them. He had said them once already. He had meant them. He did not touch the pocket again. He didn't want to scuff the seal with worry. He told himself that was why. Chapter 5. Promises Unkept. He reached the bend where the lane narrowed to the width of 2 carts and a man, and set his palm to his vest, the way he had a dozen times since the square. Leather, warm, flat. He stopped and pressed harder. The shape he expected wasn't there. The letter was not there. For a long breath, the world kept doing what it had been doing. Goat bleeding 2 houses over. Basin water flung in a pale arc. The smell of bread soaking the street. Gage's hand stayed where it was, as if pressure could teach paper to reappear. It could not. He turned and let his eyes walk the last dozen steps. Where had he taken his palm away? The chalk circle. The high throw. The brief reach and the practiced tap. His hand was off the vest for only a breath. Straight home, the courier had said. The words came back like a stone that skipped once, then sank. Gage moved. He did not run. Running made it easier to miss things. He walked with the kind of speed that let his eyes keep up, scanning for any white edge that wasn't a leaf, any flat, unnatural shape against stone. The bright line of dry cobble led him back to the square as clean as a line drawn with a ruler. He avoided the darker crescent so he could keep scanning. The chalk circle, the ring they'd marked for the game, still held. It was mended where Stella had dragged the chalk across the nicked cobbles. The ball game had dissolved into talk and then errands. Only scuffs showed the places where bodies had been. Gage dropped to a knee and laid his hand flat to the stones and felt along the line where the leather had touched him last. His fingertips found dust, grit, the slippery film of the damp cobblestone, a shard of chalk, a grain of sand that caught his touch. No paper. He broadened the circle, searching not with hope, but with procedure. The base of the courier stone, the seam where the fountain lip met its first ring, the gutter where the street dipped and carried last night's rain toward the drain grate with narrow bars. He pressed his fingers into the cobble gaps until the edges bit his skin, and then dragged them out again with grit under his nails. Passers-by stepped around him, some with a polite lift of the foot, some with a glance that offered help and then did not ask. "Lose something?" Stella said, appearing the way people do when you most and least want them. Her hair was pulled back and already escaping. She crouched without waiting for permission. "We can look." "A letter," Gage said, and the words came out small. "Troop marked." He didn't say Alaric. He could not put the name down in the dust with his hands the way they were. Stella did not ask whose. Something in his voice must have set a boundary even she would not test. She checked the fountain's second ring, the chip where children press their heels to see what it felt like to be taller, the crack where a weed pushed through. "Fisk!" she shouted. "Eyes!" Fisk came with the ball still in one hand. He kept it like it might help. "What shape?" he asked, already scanning. "Square and thin," Gage said. "Sealed." They worked the square in sections. Gage traced lines between stalls, under benches, under the lips of baskets not yet carried home. He asked the wheelwright if he had swept. The man shrugged and showed him the pile of shavings, iron filings, dust, and a stray button. Gage sifted through it until the man, to his credit, brought him a rag for his hands. Dip found them by the fountain. "I figured if there was trouble, it would be the precise, quiet kind," he said, and knelt to peer into the drain. He lay flat, put his cheek to the stone, and looked at the angle where the runoff went. "Not there," he said. "A beetle and a pin, no paper." He rolled away and pushed himself up with both hands. "We'll find it." He sounded sure, even if the search wasn't. "Look for anything that looks like paper," Gage said. "A shape pretending to be a leaf." He didn't ask them to keep it quiet. The square was already not listening. It had its own work, and the work of a lost letter did not belong to it. They combed the street until the sun shifted and the shadows moved. Stella checked the bakery alley and came back with flour on her knees and a no in her mouth. Fisk climbed the courier stone and looked along lines of sight as if height might help. Dip asked 3 shopkeepers in a row if anyone had handed in a letter and got 3 versions of no and a slice of apple for his effort from a woman who could not stand to turn him away empty-handed. Gage returned to the chalk circle again and again because your feet go back to the last place you were sure. He pressed his hand flat to his vest, as if the letter might have hidden by moving to a fold he'd missed. The leather answered only with heat. He untucked the vest, checked the inside seam, and turned the lining to the light. Nothing. He walked the path between the square and the bend the way a tracker walks a search site. Eyes wide, steps deliberate, mind listing what the ground admitted. A mark at the darker cobblestone where someone else had stepped wrong, slipped, and recovered. A thread from a hem caught on a nail. A boy's stone skipped awkwardly and was abandoned by the fountain when someone called him in. None of it made a letter. He crouched by the drain again and put his face to the grate as Dip had done. The water below moved without interest in his need. He counted the teeth and the spaces between and accepted that even a pressed envelope couldn't have gone through without a noise. He would have heard. By the time the sun reached over the roofline to stand above the square, the back of Gage's neck had gone from cool to warm to the kind of heat that makes you aware of your own skin. He realized his knuckles were scraped and gray with grit. He did not remember when he had stopped caring about that. Stella set a hand on his shoulder. "We can keep," she began. "No," Gage said. Too fast, then softened it. "Thank you." He searched her face for any sign that the shape of what he had lost had become a public story. She offered no such sign. She didn't even tell him to tell his parents. It was kinder than he'd expected. He nodded once. She nodded once back, unfolded as if from a crouch she could have held another hour, and returned to whatever the day had wanted of her before he borrowed her. Fisk left the ball with him, as if leaving something behind could make up for the something that he'd lost. Dip stayed until Gage said he could go, and then didn't owe for another 5 breaths, then did because staying had started to feel unhelpful. Gage kept looking after they left, because stopping is hard at first. He checked under baskets he had already checked, felt along seams he had already felt, and invented new seams to feel that did not exist. He moved to the far side of the square and looked back at the chalk circle from there, as if distance could show him what he'd missed up close. He found only a better view of what he already knew. Evening began to gather, the light thinned, and the air began to cool. The gull that had claimed the fountain lip gave up the spot without fuss. Gage realized he had not counted his breaths in some time. He tried and got to 2 and lost the numbers in the urge to keep his hands moving. At last he went to the courier stone and put both palms on it. The stone had been established for couriers to distribute and collect mail when the square was created. It had seen plenty of losses and didn't care about his. He accepted that. It gave him nothing, and he took it. The courier's words came back again, and he said them aloud to test them. Straight home. They felt thin. He swallowed, and the words stuck anyway. He turned toward home and walked. He didn't like that his feet knew the way on their own. He didn't like that the road didn't care that he'd failed to follow it when it mattered. He didn't like that his body wanted to reach for the pocket and check again. He did not let it. At the bend, he stopped and looked at the street with the last of the day on it. He pictured the letter where it had been. Under leather, pressed to him, warm. He pictured it now, gone. He refused to picture who might see it if not him. He set his palm to his pocket and felt the unworn bead. Smooth with unused promise. He closed his hand around it until the edges pressed back. He breathed once and made the breath reach his feet. Northwind's lead, he said, not as a credo, but as a sentence about direction. Watch everything, not just your feet. He had watched, and it still wasn't enough. He lifted his hand away from the bead and left it where it lived. He kept his other hand off the vest. Checking wouldn't change anything. He walked the rest of the way without looking back. The square did not mind that he left. The day ended its own way. The road to his door was the same length it had been that morning. He felt every step, and none stood out. At his door, he rested his fingers on the latch. He did not go in. He stood with the door under his hand and counted to 3, the way he had when the letter was there. 1 for taking, 1 for keeping, 1 for delivering. He had taken. He had not kept. The 3rd he could not use. Straight home, he said again, saying it at the door. Then he lifted the latch and went inside. The letter was gone. but the weight of it remained. The songs are only beginning. Add your voice. Like, comment, and subscribe, and walk with us as new threads are woven. The tapestry grows with every listener who joins it.